Thank you, Steve. Well, first I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be around, talking to my distinguished colleagues, but also to this very particular audience who knows what I'm talking about, actually. So this is a paper joint with Lara Tobin. She's a PhD candidate at the Paris School of Economics, and she's been working with me on this issue of land markets in West African cities. Actually, I'm going to talk about Bamako, mostly as a case study, and then come up with some theory that I think applies to many countries of the region who have similar contexts in terms of organization of land and land markets. So this is the outline of my talk. I think I spent a long time trying to motivate the study and presenting some stylized facts and descriptive statistics, because I think that's very important. People don't really have in mind all the complexity of land markets in urban West Africa, and it's very important, I think, to highlight those. Then I will have a model which is quite technical. I don't know if I'll spend too much time on that, but some of you may be interested. And I'll talk about a policy simulation that will illustrate one of the things that was just highlighted in the previous paper, which is the difficulty of implementing a policy that looks good, but which has a lot of people oppose it. So the motivation. It's been said that in Asia there's a lot of informality. In Africa it's even worse. It's really the majority of the city which is completely informal, up to 80%. Informal, we mean lack of formal property rights on the land. So from an economic perspective, this has two issues. A problem associated with lack of efficiency, which is having the land which is not put to the best use, having the wrong people in the wrong place or the wrong activities in the wrong place, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but also issues of equity. And by equity, I mean in terms of opportunity in accessing land, but also in terms of the social, economic outcomes that are generated by the informal cities that we observe. So one of the key questions, really, in West Africa is access to land. It's become very difficult for many households. Many people complain about difficulties in accessing land. So there are several reasons to that. One of them is that we have very complex processes, and I'm going to detail them, in how people access land, especially formal land. It's completely inaccessible to obtain a formal title to land for many households. There's also a lot of corruption involved with the land administration and many conflicts over land. Actually, if you look at the formal tribunals, but also the informal conflict resolution systems, you will see that they are completely clogged with land conflicts and land issues in the region. One of the main issues is the issue of multiple sales or double allocation of plots. And actually, in the paper, we start with a quotation from a civil servant in the land administration in Bamako, who tells us there is no such thing as double allocation of land. There's triple allocation of land, quadruple allocation of land. So, I mean, this is really a big issue. So people buy the same property rights on a given plot, and then there's a conflict, and then only one person, of course, can use the land. So there are issues of land grabs also. It's been mentioned. When you have fuzzy property rights, then it's very easy to grab the land. The elite mainly does that. Issues of eviction. Squatters are being expelled, but also expropriation. Expropriation has to be in the public interest in many contexts, but often it is not. People don't get compensated. It was talked about regarding China, but it's the case everywhere. Even when the legal system comes to a decision regarding ownership and use of the land, it does not get enforced. So there's a lot of political bargaining issue, etc. And, of course, tenure insecurity. All this relates to tenure insecurity, which is the fact that people may lose the plot that they have. And there can be a high probability of them losing the plot. And it's very bad for economic development. It's very bad for growth. And also, another thing that people complain about, it's high land prices. Prices are very high, both in the formal and in the informal sector. There are several reasons to that. I think there's a high demand. There's a limited supply, and I will explain why the supply is limited, both in terms of formal and informal, but there's also very high demand. Of course, cities are growing very fast. Africa is the continent where cities are growing the fastest now. The figures are from 4 to 5% in terms of population growth every year, which is a lot. There's also the issue of speculation. Okay, people invest in the land, they anticipate a price increase, so more people buy land, etc. I don't think there's a bubble. Well, we don't know yet. We need studies to say that, but there's a lot of speculation going on. There's the issue of expatriates. West African countries have a lot of migrants abroad, and they send back remittances, and people invest in the land. And one of the reasons they invest in the land is you don't have saving institutions. So the only asset that you can invest money in is the land. So land is really the focus, the central asset. It's really key to understanding how those societies function. And unfortunately, it's very insecure. So, okay, the motivation again. So we said we had inefficient city structures, and this can be a big problem, especially from the urban planning point of view. So there are challenges for urban planners. How do we accommodate this growth? How would you anticipate, etc.? And we know all urban planning systems are actually very bad. Urban planners actually have basically very little, if no control at all, on urban expansion. So city grows in a way which is completely inefficient, completely uncontrolled, unplanned for, which is very problematic. And then very costly, actually, because if you have to provide infrastructure ex post, it's much more costly than having anticipated city growth and provided infrastructure ex ante. There are environmental impact, and I think we've talked about it, the tanning industry, for instance. It can be also the lack of waste disposal, things like that, the pollution of the water underneath. And one key element is the political instability. So Lakshmi, you've talked about the people demonstrating in China, but it's also the case in many other countries. And this is linked to tenure and security, but also the distrust of institutions. People don't believe in institutions anymore, and this is very bad in terms of political stability, democracy, etc. So research, if we want to understand the cities, we need more research. We don't have enough. It's very complex. What is complex is that we are dealing with land markets that operate across different land tenure systems. You said land tenure duality. Some other people talk about land tenure pluralism, because they're different tenure systems, and I'm going to talk about it, and they all coexist within the city. So we have to understand how this coexistence functions, and it's quite mind-boggling, actually, for an economist. Do we have a land market? Don't we have a land market? Is it formal? Is it informal? What are the links between the two? What types of informal land markets? Is it squatting? Is it other types of informality, non-compliance with urban regulations? What is the economic problem? What are the market failures, etc.? And we need to understand the political economy of the land sector. This was highlighted by your issue regarding the impossibility of implementing the reform, but the whole system also functioned according to some vested interest. Why are we in those situations with very fuzzy property rights? So to do that, we need to build theories. So yesterday, Gilles mentioned the lack of data in many countries. Apparently not the case in Colombia, but in many countries there's a lack of data. But I think one key issue is there's a lack of theory. The theories that we have are not adapted to developing countries. And actually, I'm always frustrated when I talk about economic development, and people from the profession, they tell me, oh, but you're talking about a particular case. It's not a particular case. This is the majority of the cases in the world. I mean, this is what we should build theories on, try to understand how people function, not just America and Europe. So how do we understand this coexistence of formal and informal? I think it goes down to this issue. So there has been some work on that. Oops. And I think the seminal work is that of Manny Jimenez. Some of you may know him. He's not the director of Impact Evaluation Group at the World Bank, but in the 80s he was carrying very interesting research on residential informality. And he has the first model that looks at squatting, explaining why we have squatters and how it relates to the formal market. And actually, there's when squatters are expelled, they need to find some housing in the formal market. Okay, so basically this is what he has in his model, and this is a condition that is central in the equilibrium. So he came up with some partial equilibrium analysis of squatting, having a formal market and an informal in terms of squatting in the same model. Okay, but the formal market somehow is completely exogenous. So there's a formal price that is just set in the model, it's just a parameter, and it is not affected by the existence of an informal market. But in reality, formal and informal form a system. So one of the things that Jan Bruckner and myself have been working on, and then the paper has been expanded by others, is to come up with a systemic approach, a general equilibrium model of formal and informal. So what we had in mind actually was a city like Mumbai, for instance, where the supply of land is completely inelastic, is constant, and how do we explain that we have a tiny formal sector with very high prices and a big informal sector? So we have a model of squatting where squatting takes place at the detriment of the formal sector, and the bigger the squatting section of the city, the smaller the formal land supplied, and then the higher the prices in the formal area. So basically this is the idea of what we're modeling. I don't go into the details of the model, but it involves some community organizers who pays bribes to politicians not to be, for the squatters not to be evicted, and also the mass of squatters, which also acts as a barrier to eviction, and then he maximizes the size of the squatting area, taking into account those effects. Okay, and here the price of housing in the formal sector is completely endogenous. So this was the first step, but the problem is that it does not have space. Okay, we're not really modeling space. So some people in urban economics, have come up with land use models. So Alonso, Mute, Mills, all those people, there's a good summary in the Fujita book. But those models only account for formal markets. So there's the implicit assumption that you have property rights whenever you locate in the city, which is modeled like that, so it's complete tenure security. So what we want to do is to introduce tenure and security in that type of model. So this was the motivation. So the paper's contribution, I think, is showing the stylized facts, I think is very important, and coming up with that type of land use model. So what we have is, we have come up with a theory that accounts for the diversity of tenure situations. So it's not just formal and informal. There are lots of things in between that we can call semi-formal if you want. I will talk about it. And somehow it reflects this concept of continuum of property rights, of continuum of land tenure situations, which is a concept that was developed, I think, in the 1990s in South Africa, and that a lot of urban practitioners outside the economic profession are really using a lot. It's something that UN Habitat has really been putting forward over the past years. And it's very important talking about the continuum of property rights, because then it diverts the attention from just providing fully fledged property title, but looking at this incremental process of formalization and how those things can be done. So we come up with a spatial framework that has general equilibrium effects, and we look at the interaction between the land administration, we can set up fees for different types of property rights, the tenure choices that people make, the possibility of having multiple sales on a given plot, and having endogenous land prices. So it's quite complex, but this is the reality that people face. They buy land, they have to obtain some type of secure property rights, they enter into conflicts, and they have a particular location within the city. So we try to account for that. And based on that, we can do some policy simulation to look at the impact of a reform in the land administration, and in this case, in terms of changing the fees that the land administration charges the people for the different type of property rights, and we look at the opposition of different groups for those policy simulation. But now let me be more concrete and talk about the particular case of Bamako. So how do households access land in West African cities? So there have been a lot of studies looking at land markets, and there's an important tool called the land market assessment. David Dowell and others have worked on that. So here we're trying to refine a little bit that tool. I think in order to understand land markets, it's not just about understanding supply, demand, and the equilibrated price of housing and land. It's also about truly understanding the processes and understanding the institutions that are also the environment in which the land market operates. And in order to do that, what we started to do is an analysis in terms of land delivery channels. So what we call a land delivery channel is really to look at the origin of a land. When you buy a plot, where does that land come from? Okay? And I'll talk about this in a minute. So in West Africa and many other places, cities expand in the peri-urban area, land is under customary use, so the origin of the land can be customary, for instance. And then people somehow may or may not formalize that type of land, so there's an incremental process. So we also detail the possibilities in terms of incremental formalization of tenure. Okay? So when you obtain land from customary origin or from the public allocation of land or directly from a private developer, it's not the same processes of formalization and not the same channels that may lead to land being put on the formal or informal market. So we really detail that. I'm going to show you graphs you will probably maybe better understand. So we look at the supply of land through markets. So basically what we find in Bamako is there are three broad channels of land access. Okay? I mentioned the customary tenure, which is predominant, mainly peripheral. And this is where all the action takes place. This is where the city grows. So what we mean by customary is the arrangements that are more traditional, more rural, whereby people access land. So there are a lot of sociological studies that they tell you, okay, in rural areas, land is not for sale. Okay, land is not for sale. You go see the customary authorities. It can be a village chief. You say, I want a plot, and then he will tell you, okay. You provide a symbolic exchange. You provide 10 cola nuts, actually, in Bamako, and you say, okay, you can locate here, and then you settle here. It's not clear that whether you own the land or it's some kind. They say it's a don, means a gift, but not really. So it's a bit unclear. But then those customary arrangements have started to change, and there's a process of commodification of land. Even within the customary authorities, people are starting to sell land. So you observe that also at the periphery of the city. So there's a modification of customary arrangement related to urban expansion that we're also documenting. There's a public and parapublic land delivery channel, which is through the allocation or auction of land. And actually, this is how the city was thought initially. Okay, in a socialist regime, the government makes land available. There's a set administrative price for the land, and you get some type of use right for that land, and the government just provides you with land. Of course, the reserves are being depleted, so this is less and less being done, but a lot of land that is transacted has come through this process, and there's actually a large secondary market for those types of plots. So you get a use right, which is not transferable, and many people got that type of use right, but now there's a market, informal market for transferring those use rights. And there's a private formal market, which is very limited, and I could talk about it if I have time, why it is that limited and how we have failed actually to develop this type of formal market. And actually, okay. So, what results from those different channels is different tenure situations that are being observed when you look at how the land market looks like. So there are formal types. Okay, I don't know what's happening. I'm stuck here. Okay, okay. So there are types of property rights that are formal. There's a fully fledged property title, which in French we call the immatriculation, which is registered in the land administration, which gives you ownership and it's permanent. But there are also some use rights, which they call precarious title actually in Monaco, which are meant to be for a limited amount of time, but actually people use it for forever. And in theory, it is formal. But those use rights, I'll also put them in semi-formal, because sometimes those rights are transferred in a way which is illegal, or are obtained in a way which is illegal. It's not clear what are the administration which are supposed to deliver those rights. The legislations have changed. I mean, Gilles has talked about the legislation yesterday, and here it's important to understand to have the legal framework that governs the allocation of those rights. It was either the local government who was giving them or the central government. But then even after the change in the law, those who were providing the rights kept on giving those rights. So they were illegal, but they were provided by some kind of public authority. And there's all those different types of rights with the same name coexist. Some are legal, some are not legal. So you can put them in semi-formal. And there's also the administrative document, which is not even a use right. It is the start of the right. You go see local government, they tell you, okay, we will allocate you some land if you pay a certain amount, and then you will get the use right. But people just get the letter, we agree to allocate you some land. And then they already sit on the land, and they have this piece of letter which provides no right, but they use it as a property or as a use right, and it's being transferred, etc. And then there's the absence of document. So no legal property right or no administrative document, which is those who are completely informal or who live under customary settings. All those situations coexist together. What does it mean in terms of a land market? So this is a continuum. So customary tenure, allocation and payment authorization, they are the semi-formal rights, the use right and property title. So from left to right, the tenure statuses are from informal to formal. Okay? And moving from informal to formal, you also move from very weak tenure security, you have a high probability of losing your plot, to very strong tenure security. Okay? And you have some intermediate situations in between. So this I have just described. So what is important to understand is that land may come from different origins, but what is common to all those different processes is that when you occupy a piece of plot, you have to purchase from somebody the plot, and you have to establish some type of property right through the land administration. So there are basically two processes that are involved in securing tenure in a West African land market. So this is a representation of the customary land delivery channel I'm not going to enter into the detail, but you can see that you can obtain a plot from a customary origin, talking to a village chief or anybody that operates in the system. And you can transform it until you get a fully fledged property title. So those are the property ownership titles. But in between, you can get the intermediate types. You can get a use right for residential use. You can get a use right for agricultural use, even though you may have a residential use, but the use right that you have is for agriculture, etc. And throughout those processes, those situations may be sold on the market. So here's the informal land market, and this one is the formal land market with the fully fledged property rights. Okay? So I am not showing you the public land delivery channel, but it's a similar idea. I'm not showing you the formal private land delivery channel in Bamako. I'm just showing you the whole system. So there's a land delivery system, which involves those three channels, customary, public, and formal private. Somehow, those are different options that you have through. They interrelate with one another. They result in this diversity of tenure situations that I showed, and those can be transferred on a land market. So this is the complexity, actually. So we're really going into the details to describe the land market. So when we have that, okay, what do we do with this? So just to come up with descriptive statistics to motivate my theory, I wanted to collect some data. So what we did is I say almost randomly, collected some information on unbuilt land plots that were transacted within 3 years. Okay, so the survey was done in 2012 in Bamako. We got about 1,700 transactions throughout the Bamako area. So this is the district of Bamako in blue. And then we go far, far away to the urban area as well as the rural hinterland in order to have information on prices. So the idea is that those guys are under the influence of the city, and the land prices reflect accessibility to the city, but after a certain distance, you will just have the rural price. Okay?
So what kind of transactions do you mean? Is it the allocation by the city? Or
anything. Somebody obtained the plots. And then we ask.
Registered?
Anything. Formal, informal, obtained from customary owner, obtained from the administration. When we ask all those questions. Okay? So we go to the plots. They are unbuilt, so there are different ways of triangulating the information, talking to the neighbors, talking to the village chief, etc. It's really interesting the way we do that, but I don't have time to talk about it. And we obtain information on when was the plot obtained, whom did they get it from, how much did they pay, what are the types of payments that they made, how much do they think the land is worth now. We have the GPS coordinates. We know about the proximity to what, we know if they have water, electricity, proximity to road, etc. And then we can do hedonic regressions and have fun. So yes, Gilles, we're having fun with the regression as well with our data. So this is just to have Bamako. So here I look at formal tenure. So property titles. This is distance from the city center, okay? This is between 0 and 4 kilometers from the center of Bamako. This is 36 to 40 kilometers away from the center of Bamako. And this is the share of plots who are formal when you move away from the city center. So first fact is that when you move away from the city center, you have less formal plots, okay? But if you look at semi-formal tenure, you have the opposite. So you move away from the city center, people have some kind of semi-formal use rights, okay? And when we looked at informal or customary, we didn't have many actually, okay? But it looked like it's also maybe increasing a little bit. So this is maybe my first stylized fact. More secure formal tenure situations are found closer to the city center. Okay? And we want to model that. Now, we did our hedonic regressions. So here I segmented the sample into formal, semi-formal, and informal. I do my hedonic regression in order to look at the contribution of the different characteristics of the plot to the price, except distance to the city center. And then I regress the residual on distance to the city center. And this tells you the contribution, okay, of proximity to the center to the price. And you see that we have a negative gradient. So those markets somehow operate like the markets that we know of in developing countries. We still have this negative gradient. And this is for informal tenure. But when we do that for semi-formal tenure, we also find a negative gradient, but it's even steeper, you see? This is formal, this is informal, minus 0.12. And when we do, okay, so So informal, semi-formal, and informal, yes, semi-formal and formal. So the more formal, the steeper the price gradient. In order to convince you, we have run some regressions. So we have run regressions either for the sales price, when people bought the land with dummies for the time when they bought the land, or we have done it also for estimated prices at the time of the survey. We control for all the characteristics of the plot, and we find a negative gradient, okay? Distance to the CBD is always negative, so the further away, the cheaper the land. But we look also in levels at formal tenure versus informal, so it's positive and significant. So this measures what people have called the tenure premium, if you want. It's not clear if it measures the fact that the land is more secure or that it's more transferable. There's some transferability amount to that, but we have this premium. And then we interact distance with formal tenure, and we find a negative coefficient, which means that the slope is indeed steeper for formal tenure. So this is the second stylized fact, which is that the land price gradient is steeper for more secure forms of tenure. Okay? So I have different types of land uses in different sections of the city, and I have different gradients for the prices. So as an urban economist, basically, I think monocentric land use model, and I think it's going to be useful to use that in order to characterize the situation. So this justifies our model. I think I'm going to be maybe not too long on the model unless people are really interested in seeing the details. But what we do here is we adapt this standard urban land use model. So this is the center of the city, if you want. And then we have distance from the city center, and here I represent the land price, the rent, okay, as a function of x distance to the city center. This will be endogenous, and this is the endogenous limit of the city, okay? So what I have is I have an urban area which I consider open. People can come to the city. It is linear here, just a half line. There's an urban wage, which is in this case exogenous. Okay? I mean, we could endogenize with agglomeration effect, etc., but it does not add anything to the story. And we have a land rent, which will be endogenous. We have transport costs. You work in the city center, and in Bamako, a lot of employment is in the city center. So when you travel, if you live here, you have to incur transport costs. Okay. Now we also have a rural area, which is not represented, it's non-spatial. And there's a rural wage, okay, which we will assume to be below the urban wage. Okay? The city pays more. The job that you have in the city pays more than what you can do in rural areas. And there's an agricultural rent, okay, which is a standard assumption in those models. We make two simplifying assumptions. We have absentee landlords, okay? We don't know who makes the land available, etc., but they are being paid a rent. And we have a unit consumption of space, which means that we abstract from substitution effect. Everybody will consume 1 unit of space. This means that at a distance x from the city center, there will be x people consuming overall x units of land. And we complete this standard framework with tenure and security. So we'll have multiple sales. Several people may buy the same plot, but only one of them will be able to use the plot. And we have a land administration which is selling property rights, and from which people have to buy their property rights. So basically, it's just a standard urban economic model with property rights. This is what we're doing. So we're coming up with a more generalized version of the standard urban economic model, and the standard urban economic model is actually just a particular case of our model. So basically, we assume there's a menu of property rights. So this reflects the continuum of property rights that people can access that have to be bought from the administration, and they are characterized by their probability of enforcement. Okay? If I buy a semi-formal use right from the administration, someone else may also buy the same type of property right, and the two of us may have bought the same plot and conflict with one another. Now, if I buy a fully fledged property right, which is more expensive, which is registered somewhere, it's more difficult to have double allocation of that plot. It does happen, actually. It does happen, and we could talk a lot about why it does happen, especially in contexts where land registries are not computerized, everything is kept manual, etc. And there's some political economy reasons also of why countries keep those systems. I mean, it's not just a question of capacity, people not knowing how to do things. There are reasons of why things are being kept non-transparent, because some people benefit from it once again. So we assume, and this is a key assumption in the model, that people are heterogeneous with respect to their capacity to interact with the land administration. So this is the idea of clientelism, if you want. Some people are friends with the administration. It can be based on ethnic grounds, on political grounds, or whatever. There are some people for whom it is not costly to interact with the land administration and who benefit from the land administration, and some people are just far away socially. Okay, so they have a type, E, which is comprised between 0 and 1 and can take any value between 0 and 1. So the guy which has E equals 0 is very close to the land administration. So he's a friend of the land administration. He can get anything he wants from the land administration for very cheap. He's a politician, he's whoever you want who's related to the administration. The guy with E equal 1 knows nobody, has no social connection, and is very disadvantaged with his interaction with the land administration. So the idea is that we buy a property right, and we characterize each property right by its probability, the probability of keeping the plot, so tenure security, which can be pi min for no property rights at all, or pi max, which is greater than pi min when you have a fully fledged property right, or anything in between for the semi-formal property rights. Then it has a cost. But these costs depend, of course, on the type of property rights that you buy along the continuum, but on your type, if you're friends or not with the administration. Okay? So we assume that if you're distant from the administration, this cost is higher. If you want to buy a fully fledged property rights as opposed to a semi-formal property rights, it will cost you more money. I mean, here's a graphic representation just to show you what it looks like. So in blue, you have a well-connected person. So this is the price, the menu, this is the price of buying the property right from the administration. If you buy nothing, you pay 0 in both cases. If you buy a fully fledged property title, it will cost you more. Okay? It will cost you more if you buy a fully fledged property title. Okay? But if you're a friend of the administration, it costs you less than if you're not a friend of the administration. So here's the timing of the model, and I'll try to be a little bit quicker. So ex ante, you have some households who want to live in the city. You have an ex ante and an ex post. Okay, they will buy land, they will buy property rights, they will locate in the city. And then ex post, they may or they may not keep their urban plot with a probability pi, which depends on the type of property rights that they've bought. Okay? Even if you lose your property right, if you lose your plot, you still have paid for the plot and you still have paid the land administration. So those are sunk costs. Okay? So this is just two main assumptions in the model. Then we can determine the land market equilibrium. So what we do is first look at a particular location X and a particular type E, whether you're not friend with the administration, whether you're friend or not of the administration, and we determine the demand for tenure security, so conditional on location. Okay. Once we have done that, we can come up with bid rents. Okay. This is a main concept in urban economics that helps us come up with the location equilibrium. We can determine the city structure. We can determine some mapping between the types and the locations where people have bought plots, and we can derive all the land market equilibrium properties, so the price of the land and other equilibrium parameters. Okay? There are two issues compared to the standard monocentric urban model, is that we're dealing with a continuum of types. So it's a little bit more complex, but Jan Bruckner in his paper with Jacques Thies and Yves Zenou, the one on Paris and Detroit and the amenities, has solved this issue, so it's been now implemented in other papers. And the other issue is that we have multiple sales, which adds another layer of complexity. So it's quite a complex model to solve, but we managed to do it. So this is the program of the households, okay? So we assume so for a household, which will choose a level pi star, so this is a demand function for tenure security, over location E, so a household of type E, their utility, the expected utility, is given by this formula. Okay? So the utility is just the disposable income that you have in different states of the nature. Here, you say you bought a plot in the city and you kept your plot, and here you lost your plot with probability y 1 minus pi. So this is the expected utility when you buy a plot in the city, and those are the budget constraints in both states of the nature. So if you're in the city, you have an income, urban income. You have to buy the property rights from the land administration. You have to buy the plot from someone. You have to travel to the city center to make your income. And then this is your disposable income, which gives you your utility. So this is in case you stay in the city and in case you lose your plot and you have to go back to the rural area. But those are same costs, okay? The price of the land and the fee paid to the administration. And you can buy property rights that is between pi min, new property right, and pi max, if you fledged property rights. So basically, when we have that, The demand for tenure security is given by a first-order condition, which says that the marginal gain and the marginal cost of tenure security are equated. So your choice of a property right basically equates those two values. Okay? If I choose a higher property right, it will increase my costs, okay? But I have a higher chance of remaining in the city center, and this is the difference of disposable incomes between the urban and rural area. I'm going to go a little bit faster now because I have a few things to say. So we show that the demand function is a non-increasing function of x and e, okay? Which means that the closer to the city center, the highest the tenure security you will want to purchase, and the closest you are from the administration, of course, it's less costly for you to purchase a strong property right, and you want to buy a stronger property right. Okay? So basically, if we look at how we solve that, we have corner solutions. So in corner solutions, so for a household of type E, if that household locates close to the city center, here, that household will always choose the fully fledged property right. If that household locates in this zone, it will choose a semi-formal property right, and if the household locates further away, it will choose the informal property right. So, and we put everything together, and this shows, and we try to solve the land market equilibrium. To do that, we have to calculate the bid rent. Okay? So the bid rent, for those who don't know the concept, is the maximum amount of rent, how much money you're ready to pay for a given location. Okay? So you are a household of type E, how much will you pay to locate in X? It is obtained by inverting the indirect utility function, and what we find is that the bid rents are downward sloping. Okay? And this is the slope of the bid rent function. In the standard monocentric model, we have this condition called the Alonso-Mills condition, which says that when you move closer to the city center, you save on transport costs, and you need to pay a higher price in order to reach the same utility. So this is why prices are downward sloping, and it's linked to transport costs. In our case, we have a multiplicative factor, which is the property right, probability that you will keep your plots. Okay? So it's flatter than in the standard monocentric model. Okay? Because this term, pi star times t, is the expected saving in commuting costs associated with a marginal closer location, taking into account the probability that you will remain in the city. Okay, so we can rank the bid rents of different households, and there's a theorem that says that the urban equilibrium is determined by the ranking of households in terms of the steepness of their bid rents. We can come up with a city structure. So this is a bid rent for a given household. And then we come up with, we have in the city a formal section close to the city center, a semi-formal section in the middle, and an informal section. So those zones may or may not exist together. So this is what it looks like. This is distance from the city center, and this is the type of tenure security that people have. So with this model, we've replicated the first stylized fact. Okay? And we have an urban fridge. It's F. So we have EP is the highest type of the person who, at the margin, decided to purchase a plot in the city. People who have E's greater than EP do not even bother to buy a plot in the city. Others, they try. Some succeed, and some lose. So basically, now that we have the city structure, we have to come up with an exact mapping, and the mapping has to account for the multiple sales. So these differential equations just tells you that if you look at a small distance dx in the city, the number of people who have bid for this place is NDE, but the number of people who have managed to occupy this place is pi star times NDE. So this is how we solve this issue of having several people buying a given plot, and just a fraction of them, depending on the tenure security that they've bought, being able to live ex post in the city. So this is how we solve the model. I'm not explaining those curves, but we're able to graphically show the existence of the equilibrium, and come up with computing the city fringe. There's another differential equation that we use, which is linked to how we consider the fact that we have a continuum of tenure types. So what this tells you is that X plus, the guy E who resides in X as a function of E, so we come up with this equilibrium mapping is exactly the guy who was ready to bid the highest for that location. So the market is competitive. Land is given to the highest bids. So here we have a market structure. So we have come up with a market structure with a general equilibrium that incorporates the continuum of tenure types and people competing with one another for land in the city. So basically this is our, this is the land price, equilibrium land price, as a function of distance to the city and the different zones in the city. So once we have that, this is the comparative statics. I'm not going to talk about it because we don't have time, but you can look in the paper. So now that we have that, we can look at the policy simulation. So what we have in our model is that the equilibrium depends on the pricing of tenure by the land administration. So the menu of costs for the different property rights has an impact on the structure of the city. Okay? So the question is, how are the city structure, land market, welfare of agents affects when this menu of costs is changed? Okay? The issue about tenure and security, and it is often said that people do not have fully fledged property rights because it's too expensive. They can't afford it. What if we make it more affordable, for instance? What are the general equilibrium response to this type of reform? So we compare different situations. We look at a base case. In our base case, we consider an administration without a clientele. Okay? So the parameters of the cost function are determined in order to best suit the guy who's closest to the land administration in terms of social connections. Okay? So it's maximizing the expected utility of those households. And then we look at a reduction in the cost of property rights for all households. We can do all types of simulations. We can also look at when we have like the same price for everyone or things like that. Okay? I'll just show the first policy, reduction in the cost for everyone. So this is how we do that. We take our cost function, we assume that it is separable. So we have a fourth component which does not depend on the type. So this is the component which is linked to the type of property rights that you buy, which is common to everyone. And then we have something which depends on the type. Okay? We take a convex function, okay, through this C function. And here what we do here is that we assume that the cost is increasing with the type. So this is increasing linearly. And we have some type of transformation that can help us either neutralize this effect, okay, and have a rotation around some point of the distribution. For instance, if I take theta equals 0, then everybody, okay, has the same component in terms of intrinsic individual components, En in the median or anything. So everybody pays the same price. There's no discrimination in terms of whether you're a friend or not of the administration. If you have theta equal 1, you have the maximum discrimination. Okay? So what we find in this base case, which maximizes the interests of the friends of the administration or the political elite, is that the more unequal the treatment of households, the higher the expected utility of those guys who are favored by the administration. Okay? And they chose theta equal 1. They want to have the other guys pay as high as possible. They exclude them from the formal, from access to formal land, and they benefit from it. Because of the competition on the land market, if those guys do not bid for high tenure securities, it keeps the prices lower, and those guys who reside in the city center pay lower rents because they are not competing with the other guys, so they have an interest in keeping them out. So this is our base case. And I think maybe this is what we observe in cities. From this situation, we look at a policy, improving the access to secure tenure for the population, and we look at what happens. So what we do, this is x-axis is distance from the city center, and this is tenure security. In blue, we have our base case. So we have fully fledged property rights, then we have semi-formal, and then we have informal. What we do, we make land more affordable. So we decrease this K coefficient that I had in my function here. Okay, so land is more affordable for everyone. What we have is that we have more people now informal. So blue is the base case, red is the policy. We have people who have semi-formal and we have nobody in informal. So we have managed to eradicate informality in the city. What happens in terms of rents? Okay, people buy more tenure security. Because of the impact on land prices, it drives the prices up. This is the land rent resistance to the city center. So in red, you have after the policy, everybody pays more. So you have more secure tenure, but land prices are higher. So do people gain or not from that? If we look just at expected utility, ex ante in the model, we see the blue is the base case, that some people here, so this is the type. So people in this location, in terms of types, are those who are close to the administration. They end up with a lower expected utility than before. And it makes sense because the base case was made to maximize their utility. But those guys, they all win. Okay? And you can see that the area here is much greater than the area there. So those guys, there are a lot of people who win. So there's some potential for Pareto improvements. But does this policy get implemented? Well, what is the political support for the reform? In order to answer this question, we look at a mechanism of vote where only the urban residents vote. So you have the model, and you look at the ex post situation. Who is living in the city? Who managed to enforce their property rights? And based on that, we compare the ex post utility of those guys with the ex ante utility under the reform. Okay? So if I do reform, what is your expectation of being affected by the policy? And then we have those graphs. Okay? So the blue here is the ex ante utility. I showed you that many people can gain. Ex ante utility of the base case. And now we look at the ex post utility of the base case, and we can see that it almost completely dominates the ex ante utility of the reform. Okay? There are a few people here who may gain. So what this shows is that we have a lock-in effect. People who live in the city, who are urban residents, who manage to enforce their property rights, who have lower ease on average, will not let this happen. So we are stuck in this bad equilibrium. So the conclusion, main results of the paper, we have come up with a model that models the sorting according to land tenure, which is one of the descriptive statistics I've shown you. So this is really the structure of West African cities. We have a land administration which influences city structure and land markets, something people are not aware of, the link between the fee that I charge in my office and then what's going to happen to the city. And we have a general equilibrium response of the land market through any reform. And the main message of the paper is that if we want to look at access to land, we need to consider it in a systemic perspective. We need those type of analysis, okay? We cannot look at informality in isolation. Many of the papers in the past is just a case study of an informal settlement, or we're going to help those guys. But those guys, they fit in a wider environment. You were saying Dharavi is located in the city center, so it has some impact in terms of accessibility for the others. If we change something in the informal settlement, it will affect the rest of the system. We need to understand those things, okay? And we need to understand the redistributional effects of the reform. Who wins, who loses, who will oppose, who will accept. So we need to look at the political economy. That can explain the preferences for the statu quo. And this may give one explanation of why we have those stable equilibria, which are imperfect, but we are locked in those equilibria. So just to conclude very quickly, I just wanted to show you a picture. This is a demonstration of land victims, the type of thing that you've talked about for China. This was 2 weeks before the coup that happened in Mali. And I think one of the main reasons of the coup is that people were so angry about the land sector. Everybody considers himself or herself as a victim, that they really supported the coup. One of the main reasons of the distrust in institutions was the land sector. And I wanted to show you as well, this is what's happening at the peri-urban area, periphery of the city. This shows you how quickly things are changing. You can see here, this was a rural area, there was the old mosque. This is still like ag land, but those guys have managed to establish the property title already. They build those nice residential plots. This is like a big building which is being built. It already has, like, there's a Chinese shop actually on the ground floor. So this is how fast the cities are changing. And this is the mix of property rights that you see in the dynamics that leads toward this equilibrium I've just characterized with my model. So basically, I'm sorry, I've talked too long. There's not much time for the questions, but this is my work.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have time for maybe one or two quick questions. Anybody?
Oh, two.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sultan, student from CD. I'm coming from Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa. So the result of those studies was I follow them with specific attention, and I can say the outcome fits pretty well with what we live in there. But my concern is a bit broader because I think the model was emphasizes situation within a city. But if you want to have a broader view across the country, because one of the problems in West African countries, for what I know, is there is one or two main cities concentrating the whole economic activity that created huge social demand. And as a consequence, you have high prices of land or housing. So how much does the study emphasize this point? The fact that the economic is very concentrated is one single city. In the case of Côte d'Ivoire, it is Abidjan, who was the former capital, is no longer, but you have almost 80% of economic activity concentrated in Abidjan, and at the university formation, almost 90% of the universities and schools are concentrated there. So this creates a very huge demand of social in those cities. So if you take, for example, in Abidjan, housing, the prices are 10 times what they cost in the second level city. When you move 50 kilometers away from Abidjan, the housing prices rise from 1 to 10 times. So for me, this is a key point. So I'd like to know how much does the study took this into account.
Okay. So shall I answer? Okay. So there are different ways of viewing. Okay, what you're saying. Okay, if we look just at one city, okay, you talked about 50 kilometers away from Abidjan. The model shows endogenous price, which is decreasing the distance from the city. So 50 kilometers away, you may be somewhere here or somewhere there. Okay? So the model fully describes this issue of decreasing prices when you move away from a particular center. But now I think in your question we're also talking about the different cities in the country. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. So is this model valid for the smaller size cities, or are prices more less discriminated in terms of distance from the city center in small cities, etc.? We haven't looked into this, but it's also something that needs to be studied. So, but basically, this is just an abstraction to tell you that there is this phenomenon occurring in cities. We're not saying we fully describe the whole situation. It is not calibrated in any means on existing data or things like that. But we're just highlighting the mechanisms that explain why cities look like that.
Maybe one more very quick question.
Barry, I'm also from Guinea in West Africa, just close to Mali. I've been in Mali 2 times, and I've been in most countries in West Africa. And as he said, it looks like the same problem in my country, but there are 15 countries in West Africa. Yeah. Some of them have been colonized by France, others by England, others by Spain. So West African countries are not always alike. Sure. So my concern is why the study is named, is saying in West African cities. Yeah, okay. It's not saying just Bamako. Okay. Because Bamako is a little bit different from Accra. Accra is a little bit different from Bissau. Sure, sure. Bissau is sometimes different from Senegal. Okay. Sure, so sure. Okay. Each country is specific. We won't deny that, and at the bank we have specific tools to look at specific countries, to look at land and governance, come up with lots of indicators, etc. And we do that, I think, pretty well. What I want to say is that there are like main general mechanisms that are pretty similar in West African countries. There's the issue of having those legal frameworks that originated from colonization that were tweaked towards the interest of the settlers. There's the issue of independence going through socialist transitions. There's the issue of commodification of land, emergence of land markets. There's the issue of processes of decentralization. There are same processes of allocation of land under administratively set prices. So there are things in common that we find in West Africa. There are civil code countries. So I think our assumptions reflect that.
If you look at the continuum, they have like different names. I mean, I have a colleague who just went to Benin, actually, to initiate this type of study, and he said, okay, the names are different, but it's the exactly same mechanisms that we observe in Benin. Of course, we would be happy to replicate the study in other West African countries, but I'm quite convinced that the setup, the broad setup, makes the model valid in all those different places. It may be different in East Africa, countries colonized by the British, etc. But at least for those who have been colonized by countries with civil codes and who have had the same history of colonization, transition in independence, and now what's happening in terms of emergence of the country, decentralization, globalization, etc., I think it's pretty similar. So we're arguing in this sense.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you very much.